Hello everyone, although the Escoffier and Aoife patch is still yet to release, there has recently been quite a lot of information leaked about Skirk, who is planned to release the patch after Escoffier and Aoife. Usually I don't talk about info on character kits this early, as the actual beta for Skirk is still a couple weeks away, which means that any info that is released is either not true or very subject to change. However, there is a good amount of information on Skirk that seems to be in line with prevailing expectations on her kit, as well as the sources seemingly having a bit more credibility reporting on deep kit testing. And since Skirk is arguably the most hyped character releasing in the Not-Long patches, I thought it would be fun to discuss and analyze the pre-beta information about Skirk's alleged kit to set some expectations before her actual beta begins. But again, I want to emphasize that pre-beta info should be taken with a massive grain of salt. This info is likely incomplete, it might completely change before Skirk's beta, or it might be pretty close to the actual kit at the start of her beta. From the limited, currently rumored info about Skirk's abilities, we actually have a good idea of how her kit may work and how she'll likely be played. Skirk is a 5-star cryo sword user that is going to be your traditional attack scaling main DPS. She doesn't seem to have any off-field capabilities, just a pure on-field cryo main DPS. Her overall kit is looking to work very similarly to units like Wriothesley and Wanderer, where her skill enhances her normal attacks and the burst is a nuke of damage. However, she does have two main unique mechanics. First, as predicted from the finale of the Deep Gallery set, Skirk doesn't use normal energy to use her burst. She uses her own special resource bar, just like Mawika. And second, as expected from the release of Escoffier, who is a cryo support who excels in teams with only hydro and cryo characters, Skirk also really wants to fulfill this team building restriction to buff her damage. To get into a bit more detail on the pre-beta info, Skirk's skill grants her the special energy and makes her enter an enhanced state that empowers her normal attacks. Her burst consumes all of her special energy to deal a nuke of AoE damage, dealing more damage the more energy she consumes. To gain more of this special energy, whenever the party triggers any cryo related reaction, not including melt, a rift or fissure will spawn on the field up to a max of 3. When Skirk uses a charged attack, she consumes nearby fissures to restore her special energy, kinda like how Neuvillette consumes nearby source water droplets when he uses his charged attack. Since it takes time to generate 3 fissures, Skirk will likely charge attack at the end of her field time after she does her normal attacks and end with her burst. Now, while this passive implies that Skirk can work with any cryo reaction other than melt, I think it's mainly just a failsafe for enemies that are infused with an element like the hypostasis, because her other passive heavily incentivizes Skirk to be played in only freeze teams. When other hydro and cryo members on the team deal hydro and cryo damage respectively, Skirk will gain a stack up to 3. It's not 100% clear whether one unit can generate all 3 stacks, but it is heavily implied that each party member can only give Skirk 1 stack. These stacks buff the damage of Skirk's normal attacks and burst. And as these preliminary numbers show, similar to how Escoffier's Red Shred works, there is a huge leap in the damage buff when the full requirements are met, meaning that Skirk really wants the entire team to just be hydro and cryo units. On top of that, this buff seems to be a motion value multiplier like Neuvillette's A1 passive and not just a regular damage bonus buff. This simply means that this damage buff is going to be very important for Skirk's damage, and you'll want to max it out by having only hydro and cryo teammates. And that's most of what we currently know about Skirk's alleged kit. There was some limited info on her C1 and C2, as well as some comments regarding her damage to be on par with Mawika, but I just want to focus on her pre-beta base kit and what it tells us about potential builds, teams, and her overall evaluation as a character. In terms of builds, weapons wise, I think it's a bit too early to go into a lot of specific recommendations. We don't know any information on her signature, and as a traditional attack scaling carry, it's likely that any sword that gives stats like crit, damage percent, and or attack is likely going to be fine. Which weapons are actually good will have to be determined when we actually get the beta kit with proper numbers. For her artifact set, it's actually not as clear. The simplest assumption is that her best set is going to be the finale of the Deep Gallery set that was recently released, as the special passive has this unique 0 energy passive, and it has a swapping normal attack and burst damage buff that no current character can use properly. On top of the appearance of the actual artifacts matching Skirk's color profile, this was widely assumed to be the Skirk set. However, with the current information on her supposed kit, nothing that was leaked really shows that Skirk is able to use this set to its full potential. Since Skirk uses special energy, she will always meet the 0 energy requirement for the 4-piece. But since Skirk seems to be constantly normal attacking while on field, which locks her out of the burst damage bonus for 6 seconds, there doesn't seem to be any time for Skirk to buff her burst with this set, assuming you use Skirk's burst at the end of her on-field duration like every other DPS with a similar kit, which seems to be the case. This would mean that 4-piece Finale is only giving the 15% cryo damage from the 2-piece and the 60% normal attack damage bonus from the 4-piece. Now it seems you can just skill charge attack for energy, then burst to get the buff and do a big nuke of damage, but then Skirk is locked out of the normal attack damage for 6 seconds. So the current kit info really points towards 4-piece Marechausse Hunter as Skirk's best overall set, as there is currently no mention of any innate crit rate that Skirk gets in her kit, and her best looking team has Farina, which ensures that the 4-piece has consistent uptime. On top of that, Farina's damage bonus buff from her fanfare makes the damage percent from 4-piece Finale relatively worse than the Marechausse Hunter's crit rate. Of course, the kit could have some missing info or can be changed that make 4-piece Finale much better than it seems now. However, HOYOverse did just release Veressa alongside a new plunging set that isn't even better than Obsidian Codex in a lot of cases. So while nothing about Skirk's best artifact set is confirmed, I did want to point out the possibility of Marechausse Hunter being her best set. Lastly, and most importantly, is Skirk's potential team building. Assuming the kit does retain a Hydro and Cryo teammate restriction, her best team is going to be straightforward. As expected, Escoffier is likely going to be Skirk's most important teammate. She has the same team building restriction of only Hydro and Cryo teammates, and when this is met, not only do you fulfill Skirk's personal damage bonus buffs, but also Escoffier grants the team an insane amount of Hydro and Cryo red shred, while also dealing good off-field damage and providing strong heals. And with Escoffier's heals synergizing so well with Farina's fanfare stacks, Farina is going to be a highly recommended Skirk support as well, providing the Hydro needed for freeze, another source of off-field damage, and of course her damage bonus buff for Skirk. For the final team member, the best character is likely going to be Yelan for even more off-field damage and another buff for Skirk's personal damage. Shenhe is probably going to be fine as well, though it's unlikely she has the time to fit 2 skills per rotation, which limits her buffing capabilities. Other than that, you can honestly run any Hydro or Cryo character you want as the last slot, as the Escoffier Farina support duo is probably enough on their own. Now if you don't have Farina, it isn't the end of the world because there are other good Hydro supports like Yelan and Xingqiu you can use. In addition, Dahlia, the 4-star Hydro sword user that is likely releasing with Skirk, might be a decent Hydro support as well. However, if you don't have Escoffier, there's not really any good Cryo options that can compete with what she provides. You can use Charlotte as a Cryo healer for Farina, or a sub DPS like Rosaria and you rely on a Hydro healer. You can also attempt to replace the red shred with Escoffier with someone like Shilonen, but Skirk will lose a lot of damage from her passive because Shilonen isn't Hydro or Cryo. Escoffier just provides so much for this team archetype, so assuming Skirk does have this Hydro Cryo team restriction in her kit, Skirk teams with and without Escoffier are going to see a pretty significant damage difference. To end this Skirk discussion, I just wanted to leave you all with my impressions on her alleged pre-beta kit and design. In terms of playstyle, the current info on it does seem pretty simple, as even with the special energy mechanic, the info does suggest that Skirk just has the standard enhanced state with a burst nuke at the end. She does have a potential secondary playstyle of being a burst DPS via skill, charged attack burst for a big nuke, but I would have liked a single playstyle that takes advantage of both buffs from the finale set together instead of one or the other. Like for instance with Skirk having split on-field time like Alhaitham. Now in terms of team building and her role as a Cryo main DPS, I do kinda like that she is intended for one specific playstyle, which is freeze, because otherwise it would likely be inevitable that she would be in some sort of melt comp with Malwika as her best team, which doesn't sound too exciting. Making an actual freeze oriented team potentially top of the meta is much more new and unique in my opinion. However, the team building restrictions required to achieve this comes with its own issues. The main problem is if Skirk's kit is going to heavily incentivize only Hydro and Cryo teammates, then Escoffier is too important of a support to have for her optimal playstyle. Because the current Cryo roster doesn't have many strong options, especially compared to what Escoffier brings to a team, you're probably going to lose out on a lot of damage on Skirk. Now Skirk could be like Malwika, where even if you don't have Escoffier, her teams could still do a lot of damage, but Malwika doesn't have specific kit mechanics that lock her to melt teams, as she has very strong Shepherd's Overload and Vape teams as well. Skirk's kit seems to heavily incentivize freeze teams, which may severely limit her team building options. She definitely could still work in non-freeze teams like Melt, but we won't really know how good these teams will be until her full kit releases. But of course, another reminder that all this discussion and analysis is all based on pre-beta rumors and alleged leaks of Skirk's kit. This means that everything I've talked about could be completely wrong because the info is incomplete or gets changed, but there also is a chance that what I've talked about will actually be quite accurate to Skirk's actual beta kit. Additional info on Skirk's pre-beta kit will likely slowly release that can clarify things, but we'll only truly know all the correct details when Skirk's beta actually starts in a couple of weeks. I hope you enjoyed this unique early Skirk discussion video. If you enjoyed, don't be afraid to drop the video a like or sub to the channel so you don't miss out on my eventual Escoffier guide, as well as my full coverage of Skirk when her actual beta begins. And with with that, I hope you all have a wonderful day.